I'm going to lead us off with the questions. And, Kevin and Vimalasara, please hop in as you feel inspired and inclined and ready to answer. So, the first question that I will begin with is what inspired you to teach the focus of this retreat for the one that you will host here on the land for recovery in Buddhism?
So I think for me, it's my life's work. Um, you. I think it's said that the Buddha says that there's no time off the spiritual life, and I kind of reframe that and say there's no time off the recovery life. That I'm constantly in recovery. If I become awake and enlightened, maybe I go beyond recovery, but I'm constantly in recovery. And so having retreats like this actually also supports my recovery. It's not like a one-way thing that actually we do this and it's just for people for their recovery, but
Yeah.
it's also for my recovery and reminds me of my intention in life.
That's, you hit, I mean, not surprisingly, we share this, this is my life. This is how, you know, what appeared as my path. So maybe I'll add to that to say that um, that opportunity to do some Buddhist, let's call it, I'll say Buddhist recovery practice in an intensive way over multiple days allows you to take this practice more, deeper and wider and to connect with the community and so that obviously like coming out of just trying to do this alone um, and yeah to be immersed in practice and I think as you said Vimalasara that in a way highlights how uh, making this your life guide and the kind of frame of your life how we can do that and yeah so that's a great question.
Yeah, thank you. And there's just one more thing that I'd like to say, because it's not that Kevin and I are like taking Buddhism and adapting it so it works with recovery.
Right.
Okay. I think recovery is implicit in the Buddhist teachings. And, it's kind of said that one of the first sermons that the Buddha gave that said that there was addiction to hedonism, which was
Mhm.
um, lonely, unprofitable, and coarse, and that there was addiction to self mortification, which was lonely and coarse and unprofitable. And what we need is the middle way. So it's implicit in the teachings. And I just want to say that the monks in places like Burma and even India have been dragging people into the temples who have been struggling with addiction. So just really, I think that's really important that actually recovery is implicit in the Buddhist teachings. And I think what Kevin and I are doing is making it explicit.
Thank you for saying that because I do think that sometimes people see this like billing kind of oh that's for those people
Mm.
that's oh that's for people who have like a problem with being in this special problem, right? As if it isn't the human condition that the Buddha described explicitly. And I do feel, I mean, I'm a little bit of a, proselytizer of this, that what we're doing, I would like it to be recognized more as mainstream Buddhist practice.
Mm.
And just as you say, like, the people who I feel understand what I'm doing the most are my monastic teachers. You
Mm.
know, they like, they've been supporting me for 25 years, and they love what we do, and when I sit and talk with them, there's this sense of harmony, of understanding of the Dharma that sometimes gets lost when we turn the Dharma into this heady thing about emptiness and transcendence and nirvana. We lose this core foundational principle that you don't get there by jumping up there, the spiritual bypass. You get there. This is a gradual path that's built on this foundation of, we can call it recovery, we can call it sila, wise action. Yeah.
Mm.
We should have other questions though, because I know how you and I are. We can just keep going on one question.
So this gives an example, because I know one of the questions is
Yeah.
what's our teaching? Describe your teaching style, and this is partly it, really.
Yeah.
I'd like to choose one of your questions.
Good.
Because one of
Please.
your questions is, what's one of your most embarrassing teaching moments?
Great.
And when I look at that, I wanted to reframe that. What's one of my most embarrassing student moments? Because actually, I think, with you, coming on the retreat, and I don't really think I have an embarrassing moment. I might have a challenging moment, but a most embarrassing student moment is because this is a silent retreat that Kevin and I are offering. And I have sat many of the Goenka 10-day silent retreats many moons ago. And on those silent retreats, you don't talk to anybody, blah, blah, blah. And I fell in love with somebody on that retreat. And that happened. Don't get to talk to anybody, don't blah, blah, blah. And yet, I fell in love with somebody on the retreat. And it was a real, in a way, not like giving myself a hard time, but it was like, what was going on for me? What was happening there, So I could put myself love addict or whatever, but actually just how the mind, one of the reasons why I practice and why I teach is because I want to purify the mind of the defilements of craving, the defilements of greed, hatred, and delusion. So that's one of my embarrassing moments as a student, as being a retreatant on a retreat. You can answer it from a teacher's perspective or student's perspective. Up to you, Kevin.
Yeah, it's a funny one, isn't it? Because I don't think of things that have happened to me as a teacher as embarrassing, as much as just, as you suggested, maybe challenging. But then you got me thinking about what was embarrassing as a student, and it's usually only in retrospect, so I'm not usually embarrassed in the moment, but I think I'm embarrassed about my whole practice, because it's just there's this great line in Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, where Suzuki Roshi says, a Zen master's life is one continuous mistake. I love that, and so I kind of feel like my practice is one continuous mistake. But it's about how I relate to that it doesn't bother me. It's learning to not be upset about your failings or your embarrassments or your mistakes, but to continue on and to have a clarity of intention and something of right view, and then you progress, because that's, I don't know, progress is even that is such an odd term, but yeah, just being okay with whatever happens, not turning it into an embarrassment or a problem or a mistake. Just life, being a human being, being okay with being a human being. I mean, that's, isn't that like half the time it feels like that's what we're talking about with people? Like, it's okay to be human. And what does it mean to be human? because I think people have some ideas about, well, if I were really a proper human, I would be like this, but I'm a failure as a human. And that's just not, I don't think that's an accurate reading of anybody's life.
Yeah, thank you both for sharing those answers and sort of contextualizing or shifting the angle and the perspective that resonates most with you. There was something, Vimalasara, that you, in terms of mentioning the other questions, or something I think you said, Kevin. But my next question would be, can both of you speak to the expansiveness in terms of who the retreat is for? Because, a lot of the most maybe edible or tangible phrasing is around recovery. But I know both of you have mentioned that it's more than just that, also, too, who can show up for the retreat.
I'll let
I
you.
ca Yeah, I didn't quite get what the question was like.
Or just who's the retreat for?
Oh yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
I'll let you go first this time, Kevin.
Okay. I don't really like to tell people who it's for. Tell you who it's for. It's for, it's for the people who decide to come. I mean, I don't want, I certainly don't want to say, well, this group of people can come, but those people shouldn't come, you know. But I also think like saying, well, everybody should, try to make it like this expensive thing. I think like overly, like everybody will love it, kind of thing. I don't know who's going to respond to it, and I really trust that when people, I think we try to write up a description that will either land with people or it won't, you know. And if it lands with someone, whether they're like, oh, I'm in AA and I want to learn to meditate, or whether they're like, I'm kind of struggling like with my relationship to gaming or something, or whatever, that it's sort of like they're hearing something that's speaking to who they are. And I can't control that, how that's going to land or who's going to hear it. So I just want to I want to make it inviting, but I don't want people to. Yeah, I mean, I will say, I guess I will enclose it a little bit, just in the sense that it's definitely, if the word recovery doesn't mean anything to you, then it's probably not for you. We have, there is this sort of broad community that's yeah, it's got traditional addiction and substance use disorder people in it, but it's broader than that today. Thankfully, it's definitely, there are many different paths that people deal with these kind of issues. Um, so it that's, I guess, the one thing I would say in terms of kind of having a limitation. I'm not saying limitation, but who's going to be happy there? Who's going to enjoy themselves and feel that they're connecting with what's happening, I guess, would be if the word recovery means something to you.
I think I would expand that out. I think sometimes
Good.
people see the word recovery and think, oh, that's not for me. It's not about me, because they have a whole interpretation of what that means.
Yeah.
And I think really, in a way, I think just kind of what Kevin is saying is that, you know, um, yes, of course, people who are perhaps struggling with the traditional, alcohol, porn, food, blah, blah, blah. And it's bigger than that because, I know for myself that when I was able to let go of what I called my gross addictions, I can remember waking up in bed and thinking, oh my God, my biggest addiction is my stinking thinking.
Yeah.
So, it's so in a way, I think that it's for people who really want to have more freedom from their habits, more freedom from their mental states. And again, not to, and just, there are people here, you know, perhaps who, you know, are perhaps in the traditional rooms of, you know, AA or in Buddhist recovery and thinking, oh my God, but does that mean there's going to be other people here who aren't, you know, in those traditional rooms? The reality is the retreat is in silence, actually. So it's not like you're going to get a lot of talking among each other. So you're really having the opportunity to do this work on your own. Well, we will have meetings. We will have some Buddhist recovery meetings, and that's really important. And I've found it really inspiring where people have come to those meetings and have not identified traditionally of having an addiction, who have got so much out
Yeah.
of these meetings. So in a way, it's like, you know, if you're really wanting to change your habits, really want to work with your mental states, really, then come, because in a way life is all about recovery as far as I'm concerned. I always say that, you know, when we get to our early 20s, we spend out that decade of the 20s trying to recover from our childhoods.
Right.
You know, so yeah. And so again, it's like, yeah, if you think, nah, that's not for me, you know, I'm not really interested, that's not where I'm at, then great, you know.
Yeah, thanks, Vimalasara, and helping me to think about this a little bit more. And kind of what comes up for me is that the first noble truth, you know, and the truth of suffering, and which is, I think, in some ways, what I feel gets leapfrogged. Again, don't need to be critiquing the broader Buddhist world, but because when you mention, you know, having a meeting, right? This is a place where people can be really honest, and that's what's really powerful for me about this process, is the willingness to look at suffering and then of course causality, and start to, if you're going to unravel problem, you have to see the problem clearly to begin with. And that's, you know, the Buddha says what we should do with the first noble truth is understand it, see it really clearly. And that is, I think, what like undergirds the kind of this work, and in terms of because we know, like, denial, of course, with addiction is the problem, but ignorance, in the broader sense, in Buddhism, ignorance, which is the same thing, it's a denial of suffering and the causes of suffering. And so I think that we do bring a kind of level of honesty, a willingness to really look deeply into the truth of the First Noble Truth, and then the potential that unfolds and allows for. So I'll say, I think the retreat is for people who are willing to look at their suffering. That's maybe
Yeah.
one version of it, you know.
Sure. I like that. Willing
And
to
and
suffer.
and we want to help them to learn to let go of that. Obviously, it's not okay, let's sit around and suffer. No, it's really like, oh, wow, where's this coming from? Oh, look at that. And as you said, it happens to be coming from up here, the brain.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, especially the last piece that you mentioned, those who are willing to look at their suffering and really dig into it and interrogate it and pull it apart and sit with it, and find acceptance and then also healing and clearing. So, yeah, thank you for that. I'm curious about, for both of you, what are you focusing on in terms of your own spiritual stretching or spiritual growing, transforming, releasing?
Mm. I, well, since Vimalasara didn't start speaking right away, I'll say something. Um, I mean, I have specifically for the last several years been working with the Anapanasati Sutta, which is the Sutta on mindfulness of breathing, has 16 steps. It follows the 4 foundations of mindfulness. So if you're not familiar with all that language, it's about delving more deeply into mindfulness through body, feelings, mind, and the big picture of insight. So it's just traditional, Buddhism, but it's very specific, and it's broken down into very specific kind of elements, and I've just found that to be a really, really rich framework for practice. And I guess I mean, it sounds kind of abstract, I know, when I put it in those terms, but it's very much about trying to be present in my life, and when I catch myself spacing out, or when I'm willing, and coming back into my body and my breath, and then the felt experience, and seeing what's obstructions there are, and how I can let go.
Yeah, thank you for that. When you asked the question, it was really interesting to see what trended across my mind, and it was, wanting to be a better person, and just realizing that's an anusasaya, one of these latent tendencies which we lie down with. There's the 7 anusasayas and one of conceit, but so I thought, that's really quite interesting, that drive, wanting to be a better person. But if I really unpack that, I I can remember reading this article in Tricycle many, many moons ago. And it was like saying, so you're meditating and you're feeling a bit better and life is going on sweetly and you don't have some of the habits that you used to have. So are you ready to settle for that? And there was just a strong no, because these practices, great, can sweeten samsara up for you. I always say, can really sweeten samsara up for you. And actually, I would say that part of my practice over the past 10 or 15 years is the direct pointing, is actually working with the 10 fetters that bind the mind to the round of death and rebirth, and really working with that 10 fetter model. So, there's, seeing through the illusion of self. Yeah. And so really working with that. Before that I was with Liberation Unleashed, again really unpacking that, really working with seeing things as they really are, not how I want them to be, really working with letting go of these identities that keep me in prison. It's so letting go of stepping into an identity which people project onto me. So it's not just the identities that I've got, but actually people can project an identity onto me. And do I walk into that trap? So really it is, my practice is about unfettering myself, really working with rites and rituals, sense desire, ill will, these are some of the forms of the fetters. I mean, I won't go through all of them. So yeah, that really is part of my practice, direct pointing, really beginning to see things as they really are, not how I want them to be.
Thank you both for those answers. And yeah, speaking to what it is, I think, to take a seat as a teacher, in any particular lineage, or a guide in any particular lineage, and then still always finding ways to, find a different depth or a different layer in that practice and in that particular focus. Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and shift now. There are a couple of questions that folks have sent over. And some folks that want to kind of remain a little bit more in the background while we're on the call here. So I'm just going to read some of the words that they've shared, and also their question on their behalf. So the first is, I'm in the beginning of my healing journey and using meditation and breathing to help ground strong emotions and feeling overwhelmed.
Mhm.
When anxiety and fear is strong, it's hard to sit with the breath and feel through the strong emotions and overwhelm. Any advice or other techniques and practices to help with that, with gratitude?
It's just a way I come back to that please just teach a bit came into the chat, and I just wondering what do people think teaching is, because I think that actually this conversation is a form of teaching, and part of that, the teaching in that, is what is our expectations, and when we have expectations, it gets in the way of what we're receiving. So just in terms of that, of just really just surrendering. It's we wasn't actually invited here to give a talk or a teaching. We were invited to just do question and answer. So I'm sorry if teaching, if you're not getting what it is that you want. And yeah, so just want to speak to, I don't know if you want to speak to that, Kevin, before we go to the next
No,
one.
I think, yeah, I think that's fair. I think that's right. And I mean, as you said before, when we have taught together, oftentimes it's pretty much like this. I mean, aside from I'm going to give you a guided meditation, uh, and of course we do give formal Dharma talks, but for me, one of the richest things about working with you is our conversations and talking about the Dharma and sharing and kind of filling in different things together. Uh, I find it very fulfilling. So that's maybe there was just some confusion about what we, as you said, maybe an expectation that'd be more of a formal thing. I'll respond a little bit to that question, which is a great one. I mean, I think it's kind of a fundamental challenge. Really, I find it a regular challenge, like when stuff is coming up, with energy is coming up, anxiety or whatever form it's taking, to be present with it. I mean, that's kind of the whole game of meditation, is how do I work with all that? And so there's no one strategy, but if it gets overwhelming in the way perhaps the question was framed, it sounded like a little bit of overwhelmed. I think sometimes it's better to get up from meditation and move the body in intentional ways, whether it's through yoga or qigong or taking a walk. But because there can be, when we're just sitting still, and if we're not able to hold the energy, then it can become worse, like become a negative feedback loop. So I think of it, and I use the term energy very intentionally, because we call things by names like anxiety or grief or anger and sadness. But when we feel them without those labels on them, they're felt more just as energies, as sensations, as feelings. And so in terms of then working with them, the other thing is to see if you can drop the labeling and try to find out what is the essence of these things. You know, so many things that we experience in life are mediated by our labels and our stories and our history and our conditioning. And so the reality of the experience gets lost and gets framed in a way that we then take on and carry forward with. And mindfulness is, in a way, trying to deconstruct these experiences back to their primal uh, elements. And then the breath can be used very intentionally to breathe with, and this is what the Anapanasati Sutta is about, breathing with the feeling and using the breath very intentionally to soften and to to release these energies, allow them to move through. And when we're just in the body and we're with those feelings, we start to experience these things just as flows of energy, as dynamic experiences that are not, they aren't solid forms of, you know, uh, so-called anxiety, and they don't become problems. They just become waves moving through.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think actually we are going to be using the Anapanasati as the core teaching. Is that, I think we're on the same page as that, Kevin?
I'm all for it.
Yeah. So so it's a couple of things that I want to say. I mean, the first thing is a great teaching, I suppose. Who would we be without our stories? Something to reflect on. Who would we be without our stories? Yeah. And I also want to talk about that, although I really see, and I put this in my new book coming out in May, that breath is medicine, that actually at the same time, breath can be really activating for people, especially if you've come from, a strong trauma background. So just really want to acknowledge that, and actually to say that actually there will be, it's not like if you come on the retreat and you're really struggling, there's going to be nobody to talk to. That actually Kevin and I will be doing meditation interviews or whatever, just to really see what's going on in your meditations, to be able to support you in that. So if the breath is really activating for you, I think, there are other sense doors that you can actually work with. Okay, so it doesn't have to be the breath. You can work with this of coming back to the sense door of smell, or coming back to the sense door of sound. So there are ways that will help you, that will at some point bring you back to the breath, because actually in this practice of the Anapanasati, which is 4 tetrads, the Buddha is teaching us to breathe again, to breathe through the experience of the body, because so many people have left the body. They're not in the body. We know why people leave the body, and how do we come back to the body? And the practice is teaching you to breathe through the body again, and that might be hard. It might, again, these teachings is not, sometimes people think, oh, we're going to come on this retreat and it's all going to be about bliss, etc., whatever. Sometimes the most transformative retreats for me is when I've really worked really hard, when it's been excruciating, and I've taken time out, you come back and you have a breakthrough. And then, in the second tetrad, we're learning to, breathe through the experience of feelings, and then in the third tetrad, we're learning to breathe through the experience of cognition, of perception. And in the fourth one, the dharmas, kind of really, how do we begin to work with aging, sickness, and death? So again, it's a journey. It's a beautiful journey, and I just want to acknowledge that actually, if you are finding the breath really activating, then it's to begin to look at that. And sometimes I wonder, for people, when they say they're finding the breath really activating, where are you? Are you in your head? Are you in the body? Where are you? Because often that activation, it's happening in the head. And to remember that when we're in this story, the only place it's happening is in the head. It's not happening anywhere else. And just even that might give you some freedom, realizing, oh, it's just happening here, and it will have an impact on the breath. And that's what can happen, when we're kind of consumed on it or assailed by one of these stories. It will have an impact on breath. Yeah, but that's something we can work with. So thank you for the question.
Thank you for bringing that out too, Vimalasara. That was, I missed that. a little bit in the question, and it was there. And I just want to ask you if you've ever worked with, you're familiar with Ajahn Sumedho and the sound of silence that he talks about. I don't know if you know that. So
No.
Ajahn Sumedho was a senior student of Ajahn Chah. He was one of the first Western monk to go to show up in Thailand at Ajahn Chah's monastery, and he was taught mindful breathing, but it didn't resonate for him. And he started to notice that there was like a ringing in his ears. When things got quiet, he would hear this hum. And so he decided to start to use that as his meditation. So he started to call it the sound of silence. And he's actually got a book with that title.
Mm.
It's also in the Hindu tradition. It's called the nada sound, which is very interesting because that, of course, that means nothing in Spanish. And there's other monks. Another one of my teachers, Ajahn Amaro, uses this practice, and it's really, really an interesting one. But because you brought up working with sound, and typically when you think of sound, you're thinking of external sounds. But when you start to listen internally,
Mm.
uh, it's a very intriguing thing. And a lot of the time I actually use it with the breath. It's just kind of what I've fallen into because it's this kind of spacious thing that's not a thing. And anyway, I just thought I'd mention it.
Mm. Cute. There's a question for you in the chat, Kevin.
Oh, oh, really?
There's one more
Oh,
that I have that was
oh,
submitted by someone. So I
Okay,
was
let's
gonna,
go with that.
disappointment.
Go,
yeah,
we'll
I'm
go
gonna
with that
do
one
that one,
first.
and then we'll have the others that I can also read off that are in the chat too. But let me read
Ooh,
this other one that was sent. So they mentioned struggling with the feeling of waning hope tied to recovery being tied to the use of pharmaceuticals, talking specifically about the use of drugs like Ozempic, Wegovy, and other types of sema- semaglutides that are designed for people with type 2 diabetes, but are being used by those who are overweight and obese to lose weight. Now labeling this a brain disease, there seems to be no hope outside of using a pharmaceutical for the rest of one's life. I can't reconcile this and would greatly appreciate any insight you have to share about the daily walk, the moment to moment walk when one is so vulnerable. After all, I do have to eat. Thank you.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I'm just kind of just want to just quite touched and moved by that question. And I just actually started watching a documentary last night on You Can Heal Yourself. And it's just really powerful, just really actually just saying that the body has the, yeah, it actually they use like, if you remember as a kid, you had a cut and, you didn't really do much to it. You might have put a band-aid on it, but how it healed itself and that the body really has the capacity to heal itself. And so sometimes we can forget that and we're at the mercy of the person in the white coat. I think what I want to say is that so you may be prescribed these pharmaceuticals, and I think what the first thing is not to go into hatred and aversion about it. Yeah, I think that's really important because I can hear that there's some aversion and I don't know, you might think it's your fault or something's wrong with me and nothing's wrong with you. I think that's the first thing that I want to say. I think the second thing is that to explore, because there are so many different modalities out there, and I'm not sure what it is exactly that you're working with. And dare I say more and more, and I do actually say this in my next book, that if all else fails, you might want to look into exploring psychedelic assisted therapy. And notice I say assisted therapy. I think it's very different from doing it on your own, but there are so many different modalities out there. Or, you know, you might want to explore doing pranayama breathing or holotropic breathing, you know. So I'd really say that actually you've got something, and rather than throwing it out, really explore and see what else is out there. You might want to go the naturopathic way. So there are so many different modalities that you can go with. And what I'm hearing, I don't know if you're saying that these medicines are causing brain disease, then hey, you know, really you want to be looking for a different alternative. So I'm not really an expert on this, but you know what I would say is that there are so many different modalities out there, and to explore that, it may be actually just going into therapy, you know, kind of, you know, if you're working, you know, with diabetes and whatever, or you know, or with obesity or whatever. Actually, some of that, I've actually had clients who have come to me, you know, with ADHD or with obesity and whatever, and through therapy, when we've looked at the cause, something has changed in their lives. You know, something has radically changed. So again, not to think you've just got to use pharmaceuticals. I'd always say that actually to be working therapeutically as well, really. And that's part of my journey. I think, you know, I wouldn't have been able to be in this place without not being in therapy and having the meditation. The meditation was my pill to begin with, was my Prozac, but I needed to do the therapy to unravel stuff, to actually let go of stuff. And my thing was, you know, I was diagnosed as a chronic bulimic anorectic. So it's a matter of life and death when you're that. And actually through meditation as my pill and through the therapy and other things, is that I can be in this place. So, and I remember being written a prescription. I can remember, and I remember thinking, what's that going to do when I don't keep anything down? And I tore it up. You know, maybe it would have
Wow.
been quicker, you know, to have taken it. So there are many different ways. I'll end there.
Yeah, I can't say a lot about this, but I'll share a little bit of my experience. Just is that at one point when I was really struggling with some depression, you know, my partner really encouraged me to like, maybe it's time to like take some antidepressants, which was like really against my sort of like, I'm sober, I don't take anything philosophy. But I did start to do that, and it was helpful for a while. And then I wanted to stop. And what I think is really frustrating is when you get into that system, it's very hard to break out of it. And I think you're talking about that, Vimalasara, by talking about the alternatives. And there's we know that there's some, at least I think there's some value in Western medicine and traditional medicine, and there are medications that can help you, particularly when in crisis, but the system itself is not designed to encourage one to stop once you start, because they are making money off you, and that's really a problem. That becomes a problem. There's a conflict there. I lost trust in my psychiatrist because I didn't feel he was really trying to help me do what I wanted to do, and so it's. As I say, I don't have any answers, but just to share that I acknowledge and recognize that this is a complicated and challenging world.
Yeah,
So
thanks for saying that, Kevin, because I actually said to a client yesterday, you know what? Maybe you do need to, you know, take some medication, but it doesn't have to be permanent.
yeah,
Let's look at that, you know, we can work with it, you know, that fear. And, you know, because sometimes people think should be able to do it without nothing.
right.
Sometimes you might need to, and that's okay. It really is okay. But it doesn't have to be a lifetime thing. And if it is a lifetime thing, so what? If that keeps you, you know, even it keeps you, you know, having peaceful mental states and etc., then, you know, so be it.
But I think it's also fair to challenge these practitioners by saying, I don't want this to do this. I'm doing well now and I'm ready to get off this, and I've got some other supports, a better support system. And so I want you to help me to do what I want to do rather than,
Yeah,
just have this like, one response.
sure.
Anyway, boy, that's a tough one. Here we are, meditation teachers.
I do recommend watching this documentary. I'm halfway through and it's very inspiring
Mhm.
that you can heal yourself. I think it's on Netflix, one of those things, I can't remember, but it's a very inspiring. I'll get the proper name and send it to you when you send the recording out, Shay. I think all of us could watch it. Mm.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Any of the books that have been mentioned, the ones that I mentioned earlier, any other resources you and Kevin have, please, yes, we will definitely include that in the email to go out to everyone after the Q&A today. Okay, so there's a couple more questions. I'm going to read something that I believe it's Alessa, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, left in the chat. It's just a bit of gratitude. Deep bow. I am having the experience of being in the presence of two very helpful, very skillful teachers. I am being taught by the quality of presence, by the content of what is being shared, by the depth of honesty and authenticity, by the deft use of mindful speech. I am being taught by the courage and bravery I feel in the teacher's willingness to be who they are in this moment. Personally, I am being deeply taught by this. Thank you for what I am experiencing as a very deep teaching on being. Thank you. Deep bow. Just a bit of gratitude.
Sweet.
And then there's a question above. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, all of it, all of what's gone into the chat. Do you want to read the question from Pam? Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, a question about disappointments for Kevin. I've been disappointed over these years by relationships, by jobs, by whole careers sometimes. And inevitably, what doesn't really help becomes the go to fix for
Oh,
this disappointment, how to break the cycle. So, yeah, both of you also have, any answers or replies for that.
yeah. I, well, there's an easy Buddhist answer to this question, but I don't want to treat it lightly in that way. But inevitably, I have to start with that. I mean, to say it's an easy Buddhist answer is maybe silly, but disappointment is within us. That's where it comes from. It's not, this is a recovery principle, that we don't look outside ourselves. We're not trying to blame others for our circumstances. When I mean, I've certainly had to do this when the same thing keeps happening to me in my life. I have to start to ask what my role is in creating those circumstances happening. And and in reality, in terms of actually solving a problem, that's the only place to start anyway, right? Because I can't change the external world. It's difficult enough to change myself, but I certainly can't change others. And so certainly the first thing is to really investigate deeply the kind of inner causes that allowed these circumstances to arise. But then it sounds like what you're saying is that when you say inevitably, what uh, and inevitably what doesn't really help becomes the go-to fix for the disappointment. So whatever that, I mean, if we call, I don't know if you need to call it addictive, but the destructive behaviors we do that are attempts, maybe, and maybe they're not even destructive, but they're attempted fixing it or self-soothing that really isn't leading to healing. So that's the place where, we need to look at what are skillful ways to respond to this pain. What are skillful ways to heal from this pain, and thus to start to break out, because to break out of those, not just the pain, but that habit. Because I think that when we find ways to take care of ourselves that are wholesome, that bring happiness to us and don't do harm, that in that very process very often is revealed the things that we're causing in this, like for instance, the repetitive pattern of being disappointed. So we start to see that our whole approach is to our lives has been counterproductive, and that we need to just take another route, another path. So that path is what the Dharma is about, the Eightfold Path. It's about, changing behaviors, changing our view of the world, our understanding of the world, and changing really our mind states and emotional states through the meditative training, through the mind training. So the Eightfold Path is really the path for healing that we are offering, that we're teaching, that we're also living and practicing. And through that, I think that gives you the possibility of changing these larger patterns and becoming, cultivating the life that you really want to have. I don't know. I hope that was clear enough.
Yeah, I'm not going to comment on that because I do have to leave soon. So if we could go into the next question, which I think was,
I have
yeah.
one more that was sent to me.
Okay.
Could we do the one which is directed to me, because I do have to
Yeah,
go?
absolutely.
Will you comment on the prolonged grief being recently considered a disorder in the Diagnostic Statistic Manual of Mental Disorder? And I think V is asking me, and what are the larger implications? Yeah. In a way, I'm smiling because it's like, you know, this is what the prince was talking about. I mean, this is why the prince went forth. If we talk about the 4 sites, and one of those sites was about death, just coming into relationship that we're gonna die. This grief. So this is grief is part of the human condition, and it's which is why we're going to suffer. Again, the Buddha clearly says, part of the suffering is we're going to suffer because we're going to age, we're going to get sick, and we're going to die. And so in a way, these teachings really help us to come into relationship with that grief. So in a way, again, working with grief disorder, I mean, I'm glad that it is part of the DSM manual, because grief is something big. And I know for some people, that grief can go on for years. I mean, I had a friend who, I can remember, like, it wasn't even somebody who died, that the relationship ended, and for 10 years was in grief, you know just of that impermanence, that thing of it, when we're talking about the loss. Because I know with the DSM they kind of focus more on the loss of somebody in our lives, but we have loss in so many different ways.
Yeah.
The loss of a childhood, the lot so many ways. And so I think it's really important that we do begin to pay attention to grief. And in um in the context of Buddhism, that's what we're doing. I mean, the whole thing of impermanence, you know, of really understanding impermanence, understanding that everything changes. And often we are so much in protest. I mean, let's face it, you know, people say, oh, yeah, I can cope with everything changes. When the pandemic, look at how many of you were happy with changes. We were in protest. And I always said that the Dharma, this is what it was preparing for us, telling us that everything changes. This is it. It's not going to be like this. It's not going to be like this forever. And, you know, so grief is an emotion that very much needs to be attended to, just like anger needs to be attended to, just like even joy needs to be, you know, attended to, because sometimes we can get so attached to joy that if something else happens, we, you know, we are in protest. In fact, the late Goenko would always say that we're playing this game of sensations. You know, we're in happiness, and when that goes, we go into ill will, and then we want to go back into happiness, and when that goes, we're back into ill will, and we're like a pendulum, you know. So just in answer to your question, actually, what was the rest of it? What are the larger implications? Well, you know, and again, if we don't pay attention to grief, it's going to have an impact on your whole system. You know, we're not, these emotions aren't separate from the body. These emotions can cause illness in the body, you know. And sometimes the larger implication may be that we turn to alcohol, we turn to distracting things to move away from the grief because it's so painful we don't want to feel it. So that can be the larger implication, that actually we can actually fall into that hell realm of addiction, or if we think of the wheel of life, we can fall into the hungry ghost realm, you know. So yeah, so I'd see your mouth moving a little bit, Kevin. Did you want to say something?
I'm thinking about that. I think I have read that some people have the concern about this particular diagnosis is that it's turning something that's natural into a pathology. And so, but when they talk about the prolonged grief, so then immediately, of course, I think about the Buddha and how he addressed people who lost their minds
Yeah,
about grief. And he was like, snap out of it. Like,
yeah.
and it's sort of like, it's just like two different, systems, right? We have this medical model
Mm.
where we're going to treat you for this disease, but the Buddha also wants to treat you for the disease, but he wants to treat you more with wisdom than with pills. He says, like, remember, everything is impermanent. Don't, you're deluded. So it, um, yeah, it's just I think both systems are saying this is a problem. You don't really want to, like, grief is natural to a point, but when it becomes overwhelming and uh, takes over your life, then it's not wholesome. It's not helpful. And but
It's
uh,
interesting you say that, Kevin, because life is natural, but we've turned that into pathology. I mean,
right,
I think
right.
we've pathologized almost everything, you know.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Yeah, we're not supposed to die, I mean, we've got these people that are like, oh, life extension and oh no, if you like you could live forever, really, if you just stop the aging process.
I just read you can be when you're dead, you can be injected by this compound so that your body doesn't disintegrate. So if they discover a way of you coming back to life, you will be able to. And these people have frozen their assets because if medical finds a way, they don't want to be poor. I mean, I just like it's just the human the
Yes.
human condition. But as you say, I mean, I think of the story of Kisagotami, and actually that was I mean, you know, one of the things is always said about the Buddha, that everybody was given a different teaching. And you
Yeah.
know, with Kisagotami, it was like, well, you know, you go to every household and see, you find a mustard seed from a household that doesn't know death,
Yeah.
And when she goes from house to house to house, she gets it somewhere. She actually realizes and gets it in that teaching. Suddenly something drops and she gets it, and can accept that her baby has died.
Insight is the actual cure. You know, drugs can, help you to deal with the symptoms temporarily, but if you actually want transformation, it's through insight.
And that pill is bittersweet. I always say it's bittersweet because it's like, oh my God, it's sweet, whatever, but that seeing. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I do have to go, but I've really enjoyed being here. I just want to say I've really appreciated all of you staying on for this call. And this is one of the ways that Kevin and I do teach. I'm assuming we haven't actually kind of scheduled out what the retreat looks like, but we will be having some quick Q&A at the retreat. Kevin
Yeah.
has had, yeah.
Yeah.
So, I hope that some of you will come and sit with us. I want to say being on retreat is one of my favorite things to do. So, to think that you can be in company with somebody who really loves being on retreat. And I think Kevin loves being on retreat as well. It's one of my favorite things to do. I wish I could bring all my mates and all my friends. So I really hope that we get to sit with some of you.
Yeah.
Vimalasara, thank you so much for making space and time and saying yes to the Q&A. Thank you again.
There is a question about whether the retreat is going to be available online, and I believe the answer to that is no. It's
don't have
it's
it set up for that.
strictly a in-person retreat. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. We will be doing an online day together
That's right. Yeah.
June
Yeah.
the 2nd, I
And
think.
if you don't mind, I just want to say that I think that it really is time for us all to start to come back together. It's just really important, and I think the pandemic was great that we had this resource, but we've lost something, and the being together, it's irreplaceable, So um,
And just recognizing that actually when everything went online, it opened the Dharma up to people who were never able
yeah,
to be in person. So, if you really, it's just something that you can't do, then, just go on the Spirit Rock website. Kevin and I will be teaching a half day online for those people who can't be
yeah,
in person, but actually really encourage you, if you can, to invite you to come and sit with us and be in person.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I want to just ask really quickly, Vimalasara, I know you have to head out. There is at least one more question, Kevin. Are you able to stay on for that question or?
Yeah, yeah, I can stay.
Okay. All right, Vimalasara, well,
Great, great
here
to see you,
today.
Melissa.
Thank you. Okay. So the other question that I have is, having a few years of retreat experience, what can I expect the differences to be for a retreat under the recovery umbrella versus other insight retreats?
Yeah, good. I'm glad that someone asked that, just in terms of the mechanics and the scheduling. It's very similar. The only difference is that in the afternoon, we'll have an hour or so of mindful communication where you'll just have a partner working in very structured, not like just blabbing, but like very structured dialogue, very similar to insight dialogue, if you're familiar with that. So we'll have that in the afternoon. And then at the end of the day, we'll have just a circle where people can share. But the container itself is still noble silence. That is, you're not, you know, talking to people outside of the meditation hall. There's no informal interaction. It's all in that same container. And I've found that there's a certain value there's a great value really in having these little windows for connecting with people in the retreat. Sometimes it helps to pull us out of the sort of self obsession that can happen when you're just in silence for days at a time. And so it can be nice to kind of break out of that. And it also works very well in terms of then being able to integrate these teachings when you go back home and start to become more skilled and more intentional with mindful speech. So it's these moments of interaction, I think have a lot of value on multiple levels. Other than that, it's going to be wake up early, meditate, have breakfast, meditate, Q&A, meditate, walking meditation, sitting meditation, walking, sitting, just like a regular insight retreat. Dharma talk in the evening, pretty familiar to anybody who's been on a retreat like that.
Well, Kevin, thank you for answering that. I just want to open it up to anyone else who's still on the call. You're more than welcome to unmute if there are any additional questions that are coming up for anyone in this moment.
Catherine, are you going to come on the retreat? I have a friend
I
here
am.
that's been sitting there and I've been wanting to say hi. So,
Hi,
oh,
hello.
good.
Thank
That's
you
great.
all for this. Yeah, a friend of mine sent me the link yesterday and I was like, oh my God, okay, I'm going to take a couple days off work,
Good.
make a drive. Will you be having Opie doing any Qigong or any movement, mindful movement?
Good question. If we are, it's going to be Vimalasara leading it.
Okay. All right.
My
No,
mindful movement now is trying to walk up the steps. I've got
it's
to
the golf swing. That's
there's the golf. That's right. Mindfully swinging a golf club. That's right.
no, I'm really looking forward to it. So thank you for today, and
Yeah,
I'll see you soon.
that's great. Glad to know it. Anything else we want to address? Anyone want to be brave and speak? Oh, there we go. Megan, hi.
Hi, Kevin. Yeah, I don't really have as much of a question, but I just wrote some notes here that you said part of what's so powerful about recovery meetings is the willingness to look at and talk about suffering in this really honest way. And I just wanted to thank you for that. You put words to what I've been experiencing. I've been attending recovery Dharma meetings now for almost a year, and I was trying to put those words to my partner and to some of my dear friends about what's just so powerful about these meetings. And so I'm just offering gratitude for you putting words to what I've been feeling and experiencing.
Thanks, Megan. That was the thing that I loved when I came into recovery, because it was like I think before that, I felt much more alone and more alien in the world. That, well, I've got all this stuff, but nobody else is talking about it. So I guess it's just my problem. And then, I started to got sober in AA, but very similar. And I started to hear people share, and it's like, oh, I'm not the only one who feels that. And I found that hugely freeing, and it very much informs my teaching, because frankly, there have been times, I've been doing Buddhist practice for almost 45 years now, and so I've sat with a lot of different teachers, and sometimes teachers will project something very positive, but I'll take it as like comparing myself to them or comparing myself to some ideal that they're putting out. and then I'll be like, oh God, guess I'm not a very good Buddhist, I'm doing it wrong. And so as a teacher, I've always wanted to avoid causing people that kind of suffering, that kind of comparing mind. So I've just tried to be honest about my own challenges as a practitioner. And so anyway, yeah, as I say, that informs my teaching. That's a part of how I approach teaching. And that's, for some people that'll be great. And for other people it'll be like, oh no, I want something, that's not right for me, and that's something I've come to understand that you know, uh, everybody needs to find their own path and the style of teaching and practice that's going to work for them. It's not always going to be the same thing. Yeah. Ah. Okay. It's Elisheva.
Elisheva.
Yeah. Very nice.
I've been on retreats before, silent retreats, and my partner has been on a retreat with you. And in terms of my recovery status, I mean, I've been to some 12-step meetings, but I haven't, but I was more like I'm in recovery from being in an alcoholic family. And so I'm guessing that, and the sharing time or whatever, I would just share that. And I mean, I'm just checking in about, like, I know that, any kind of craving and aversion is sort of ripe for this work. So I got the message that you said about that earlier, and yet, just seeing how I might fit in that
Right.
sense.
Yeah, absolutely. You will fit in. Well, I don't like to make promises or guarantees, but I find that a lot of people who come through Al-Anon and Coda and just with those kind of issues where it's not their own personal substance or behavior addiction, many of them show up on the retreats I teach, and it's it's something that I think is shared by a lot of people who also have substance use problems, that they have, relationship problems, right? It's like that, and managing, their attempts to control people or their attempts to please people and all of that. It seems to be very much sort of a thread that runs through the recovery world, both from substance users and non-substance users. So I think you will be quite comfortable with that. Yeah. Well, probably be uncomfortable, but
Appropriately uncomfortable.
There you go. Perfect. That's I think that's a new phrase I should adopt, being appropriately uncomfortable. Thank you. Where was your partner on retreat with me?
In the Santa Cruz Mountains.
Oh yeah. Okay, good. Wonderful. Well,
Does anyone else have anything additional in these last moments?
I'm glad we got some of those very practical questions too, like
A good balance.
structure and then like, does this kind of, will I fit in with this? That's a really good, it's helpful for people to know.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to close with a few words. Kevin, did you want to say anything to conclude on your end?
Well, I mean, I'll just say that I'm really pleased that the Big Bear Retreat Center is having us, has invited us, and I really appreciate all your work to bring this together, Che, and really, really pleased that the center exists and that it's inviting us in. I think it's going to be a great opportunity. So thank you.
Thank you for that, Kevin. Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm incredibly grateful to you and Vimalasara for making the space and time today and really being engaged and speaking from your heart and speaking with true honesty. And I'm really looking forward to having both of you here on the land and just how folks find exploration and digging into themselves and healing and being in community together on that retreat. And I just want to mention a note that we have from Andreas in the chat. This sit today and the Q&A with Kevin and Vimalasara is donation based, is Donna based. So if you would like to leave any additional Donna, if you have left some already, or if you haven't just yet, there is a link in the chat where you can do so. We can also send these details out to you in the email that will go out in the coming days. But the retreat that Kevin and Vimalasara will be leading on the land here again is from May 9th to May 12th. You can visit our website, which is linked in the chat here for the registration page for the retreat. You can go there and see about registration. We do have some space and possibilities for financial assistance and accessibility. So you can reach out to guest services at bigbearretreatcenter.org if you have any needs or any inquiries there. And yeah, just deep gratitude for you making space and time on this Saturday and being present and being engaged. And please feel free to, register for our mailing list. You can always receive notifications from us about online half-day sits or online Dharma talks or Q&As like you experienced today, and also keeping up with our full retreat calendar for the year. So thank you everyone again. Please be well in the rest of your day and in the coming days. And we look forward to seeing you online and on land. Thank you.
All right.